think is very, very important, because a lot of people don't really know about climate change, and they think this doesn't account for me, or a number of things. I hear these all the time. And in fact, there was in the Albuquerque Journal this cartoon that came out just this last week before I came here. It's a little guy in a car. He's driving along the road. He says, "There's no proof humans are causing global warming, so I'm not going to change my life." Then he keeps driving along, and there's a little rainstorm, so he's in water a little bit. He says, "The damage is already done, and we'll have to adapt. I'm not going to change my lifestyle." So he keeps going along. Now he's standing on top of his car. "Hydrogen and technology will save us. I'm not going to change my lifestyle." The final one is he's submerged like those little men, you know, in that lake, those little men. And he says, okay, I'll change. Blah, 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 blah. So we need to address this personally, collectively, before we have to glug, 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 glug. Because many people are already doing that, and those are not the ones that have caused this challenge. And so with this, I say one thing that's very important is to connect the dots. And this was a great depiction of this. This was in a Central American booth, and I was talking to these folks. And I noticed that on their banner of things, and this was actually Nicaragua, no, it was Central America, including Nicaragua. Anyway, I have a friend in Nicaragua, and I was most taken first with this top shot, which shows forests just being washed away because of unprecedented floods, rains like Hurricane Mitch kind of started this ball rolling a number of years ago. And then I began to see some of these other things, and food insecurity is here because of the droughts. That arid zone in Central America has had tremendous, unprecedented droughts. And then I saw La Bestia. I don't know if you can see it here, it's hard to see, but it's the train that carries people from the south to the north. They call it La Bestia. Many people lose their legs, their lives, their loved ones on that train. La Bestia. And I said, La Bestia? And he said, yes. That's connected to climate change. People are coming up here partly because of climate change and how that's helping destabilize our region. So all of these concerns that we have are no longer isolated, separated unto themselves. Increasingly so, everything, and the Pope says this very strongly, I believe in Laudato Si, in care of our common home, that the economy, the ecology, the human family, we're one home, all of these things are interconnected. Doesn't mean we have to work on all of them, but we have to have a consciousness within ourselves that it is connected with how we are living on this planet and with climate change. Issues of terrorism, violence, war, immigration, water, human trafficking, they're all only going to increase as we have increases of these exceptional, which are no longer exceptional, but more normal weather patterns that are partly due to climate change. So, making connections. And then solidarity work. And there's many ways of being engaged in this, especially for people of faith. A couple of things that I really like are the Carbon Covenant, which the Franciscan community made a very wonderful contributions to for protecting forests in Cambodia and in Cameroon. And these two gentlemen with the director of IPL, Susan Stevenson, are from Ghana, which is one of the countries where we're also doing this forest project with Carbon Covenant. Another one is one I became familiar with this last year that's in Central America. It's called Chico Mendes Reforestation. Very grassroots. All these are very grassroots. It's not coming in and taking over. It's supporting the people there that are already doing things. And the final thing is we have a choice. Are we going to be a voice for love in action or not? Cardinal Turkeston, which was one of the chief writers of the Laudato Si, Care of Our Common Home, who's from Ghana, was at the COP. He had a press conference one day, and what he said I thought was rather significant, and I'll just read it. The Pontifical Council in Rome is set up to push the message out to all the Catholic dioceses in the world. Every diocese is encouraged to have a commission on justice and peace. From there, the message must get to the parishes and the Catholic schools. The priests must be educated. If they don't know about environmental and climate change risks, then you have a lot of people in pews who don't know anything about it either. Humanity is one family. As brothers and sisters, we have only one common home. The earth was given to us as a garden. Let's not make it uninhabitable for the children who come after us. And so these are very important words. They're not just coming from Cardinal Turkson or the Pope. This last year, the Muslim community had an amazing document, an international document from Muslims' Declaration on Global Warming, very significant. The Dalai Lama, right before the COP meeting, had a very strong message that came out for the Buddhists. Jewish community, all of the faith communities have. The moral and ethical imperative is very strong. So I'll leave you with this picture and an invitation. Are we all at this table sharing bread, even though the bread may not be perfect? Maybe it's not quite the bread I want to eat, but we all are at the table together. And we have nowhere else to go but this table. And I think this gentleman has a nice, friendly face. And I think it's a wonderful invitation to life and joy and meaning. So I invite your questions or comments. Comments, questions? They're going to bring the microphones around. So if you just hold up your hands, you'll get a microphone so everybody can hear.
Hasn't there always been a question about the United States joining anything without congressional approval? Did the United States agree to these 5 points?
Okay, this particular agreement does not need congressional approval. It was formed so that that wouldn't have to happen. So we already have in our indices, or our countries, what we're bringing to the table, have included this clean power plan, which has already been passed by the EPA, which is down at the state level now. We already had bilateral, aside from the Congress, negotiation between the two leaders of China and with President Obama last fall, that we're going to reduce our carbon emissions, and that was major in this agreement because people kept saying before in Copenhagen, what about China, what about India, what about the developing countries? So that can no longer be an excuse or a stumbling block. They're working on methane rules right now, which they hope will be part of this. So what's happening is we're working outside of, but what we are legally bound to, but it does not have to go through Congress, are those ratcheting up timelines where we state what our accountability is, what we have done. And the UN is the, and the COP itself, Conference of Parties, are the ones that are figuring out how that mechanism is going to work and that accountability. This does not have to be approved by Congress. There will be a signing of this document at the UN in New York on Earth Day. And everybody at the COP agreed to it. Some had some problems. Probably one of the most vocal was Nicaragua. But even so, they said they went along with it, that they had some real problems because there was no money for loss and damage, some of those things that I pointed out. But no, this does not have to have the approval of Congress. It will happen. It's good it's happening now, where we're at least sure of at least some of the administration that we have now that makes it certain that it will sign on to it. Yeah. But thank you for that clarification. Because in the past we did not sign Kyoto. And when I was in Copenhagen, I personally felt the United States was a real stumbling block in anything happening at that negotiation.
I'm thinking, with the elections coming up in the caucuses, that's a question that should be asked at the debates of each Republican person and Democrat. What are they doing, or what are they feeling about climate change, and how are they implementing it if they're a senator or whatever?
Right, I agree. And this was, I thought, a wonderful thing. The Bishop of Des Moines, Iowa, in the summer, after Laudato Si came out, he had an editorial, an op-ed in the Des Moines paper, And he said, because I was the hotspot center for all of this stuff, and he said, you all out there, you need to go to those caucuses, but even before the caucuses, the house parties and all this. He said, you need to be asking all those candidates questions, just what you're saying. And you're not going to ask them, do they believe in climate change? You ask them, what are you going to do about climate change? So it needs to be very direct, so that they don't have any him-hawing way to get out of it. But very, very important point. And I think part of the reason that this Paris Agreement happened was because the civil society pushing and pushing. And I have to say a great deal of the developing countries and those who are economically poor and challenged. They just kept pushing and pushing year after year, all of these leaders of these more powerful nations that say we had to, and it's a civil society and some civil disobedience. And in fact, 350.org is already planning civil disobedience for, I think it's a week in May, around climate change issues, concerns around the world, to push, to ratchet up what the promises are. Okay, I'm sorry, Dan.
Joan, in talking to a lot of people then in Paris, and you have your own ideas, what are some practical things that you're thinking about as far as cutting back on carbon emissions? Well, you give us some samples.
I can give you, a number of possibilities. So it depends if you want to do something personally or collectively. I think an initial thing would be, if you've not done any of this, is signing the Paris Pledge, checking to see what your carbon footprint is, looking at what you eat. One of the ways to reduce carbon emissions quite quickly is to limit drastically meat products. And that's not a sacrifice really at all. Even going back for Catholics to 1, 2, 3, 4 days of fasting from meat. It's not even fasting, and there's so much food out there you can eat. It's not like we're going to starve. So that's a huge way. Carpooling, walking, biking, using public transportation, promoting public transportation, going to those city council meetings, hearings when they want ideas. What are we doing about buses? Do we want more money for that? Bond issues on those kinds of things. In faith communities themselves, looking at emissions, energy efficiency, looking at solar panels, renewables. Those are all real practical, down-to-earth kinds of things. Eating local, so that your food is not being trucked in from everywhere. Growing something in your own backyard, no matter what it is. But then the other thing that's really, really important, I believe, because all those personal things are important, but they're not going to get us to where we need to go with this emissions. And that is somehow who you elect, what their stance is, and public policy advocacy on a lot of issues. And that really depends upon, and I don't know the local issues here, but for instance in New Mexico we're working on a number of things. We're working on trying to renew renewable energy tax credits. So again, it gives a jump start for a few more years for solar panels. The oil and gas industry, they have been having tax subsidies basically since the 40s, 1940s. They say they don't, but they do. And so that continues where solar has not even had that, and they want to exit out already. Addressing the whole methane pollution issue from leaks from methane, oil and gas industry is big in our state, and storage. The EPA is working on that right now. You could say, I support these methane rules, that we shouldn't be wasting this. We should be saving it. The clean power plan that I mentioned that you're going to be working on, and that has a direct effect, can have a really direct good effect for those people who are economically poor in the state, because if you get your plan in early, there are special incentives to help with energy efficiency and some of those kinds of things. So that's just kind of a snapshot of a few things.
Locally, we have the Rochester Climate Coalition, if anybody's interested to join that. And we're working on next April's Earth Week activities and Earth Fest to just educate people. And then statewide, I would say the strongest organization is Minnesota 350. And they really do a lot of excellent work. They stop in pipelines, crude oil stuff, and all that coming through the state of Canada and North Dakota.
Right.
Those are big issues. And also tar sands, fracking issues,
Right.
which is a really big issue. Some of the counties in eastern part of Minnesota
What was
are
that called?
desperate to stop any further destruction of the environment.
Okay, those are great, Pat. And with that, and I just a follow-up to this, and these are very good, and 350 does very good work. We work with them collaboratively. But there's another element I want to add that's just real important. Some of you might have ways or patience or that courage that I mentioned earlier to do this. But what needs to happen is one of the things that Pope Francis in the encyclical, which is basically what this encyclical is about, is dialogue. And we need to be having conversations with those people that are not already the choir. The choir is important, and we need to raise our voices more and higher. But we need to be talking to people who are not the choir to say, you know, this is an ethical, moral issue. What are we doing about it? If they're deniers, well, there's all kinds of ways. You can look up on the internet to find conversation pieces on how to address this. Find what's important to them. Talk to them about that and weave this in. But somehow we need to be bridging some of this divide that we have in this country and in our families and our communities on this issue. And that's really hard, and that's very challenging to do.
Educationally, it would be nice if the Associated Press could establish goals that would be weekly goals in their newspapers to reach all people, all high school students, all parents, all elementary students, to have reachable ways to be able to save what needs to be saved as we decrease our carbon footprint, so that we bring it on an understanding level of daily activities. And I think the newspapers can do an awful lot in a teachable moment.
Yeah, and I think that's a good project right there, to petition the media and the media locally to have stories about this and articles and success stories, what people are doing. It took me 2 years to get into the Albuquerque Journal, just the solar panels that churches are putting up. They just didn't think this was newsworthy, you know, to put that in the paper, and finally we got it in. But that's a very good point. I do want to bring up something about education, though, that I think is significant, and the Pope talks about it in Laudato Si, is that, you know, in a lot of our schools, we've had environmental education for a long time, and that's all very good, but there has not been with that the values, the ethics, the morality, the spirituality with that. And that's what needs to be connected with caring for the earth, caring for creation, addressing climate change. Our brothers and sisters who are suffering, the human face, the face of the sacred earth, the sacred planet. So that's another element that I think it behooves us, wherever we're at, you know, in our own communities, that we need to be talking about and inserting in there.
Joan, I just want to add one more thing. Most of the educated people read all the periodicals, but John and Jane Q. Public
You're
do
right.
not. They read the newspapers.
You're right. Right. Yeah. Thank you.
I just have a question for you. What is the organization doing as far as the lumber companies taking down all the trees in the rainforests? And then the chemical companies, I don't seem to hear much about that. It's more on the fuel side.
Okay. Well, with the rainforests, there's a lot of work on that, actually. Interfaith Power and Light, for instance, we're trying to protect it in some very specific areas because we're not an enormous organization. So we've targeted 3 countries in Africa and then Cambodia, where illegal logging is going on. Chico Mendez organization I mentioned is in Guatemala, and they're addressing it in Guatemala, where there are people that are being killed because they're protecting forests and also trying to stop, you know, the fossil fuels from coming in, the mining, etc. So there are some organizations working on that, and that's real significant to keep the forests. And then about chemicals, like in hydrofracking or chemicals
Well,
in?
and I heard you talk about that a little, I'm more in agriculture perhaps.
Oh, in agriculture, oh, yes. You know, and in fact, with that, there's a whole thing that's coming to the surface now that's really quite interesting, and I don't know anything about it other than very superficially, but one of the ways of addressing carbon and carbon holding and sequestration is through farming without the chemicals, but a certain type of agriculture that's been researched by a woman, I believe in Australia, and she was at the COP speaking, she was in New Mexico this fall speaking at the Kavira Coalition, I cannot remember her name, but yes, so that would be directly related to helping the soil grow, which is a natural carbon sequestration part. So that whole issue of chemicals in lots of ways, and agriculture would be one. And of course, agriculture is huge in terms of the fossil fuel petrol that they use for these different chemicals. So I hope that's a little bit of, it's not like I'm an expert on these things. Yeah.
Joan, first of all, Terry, I'm delighted that you've taken the time to bring this back to us. I'm very grateful. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm going back to that remark about, or the bishop, you had his picture and were quoting about, you know, it's got to get into the pews in terms of that grassroots. What would it look like? Our center is here in Rochester. Some of us belong to, I think at least 3, if not 4 parishes in Rochester have some of us as members, or at least meeting with the deanery. And I'm not putting this, Marilyn, I'm not putting this on leadership. I'm inviting us to think about what would it look like if we started in some concrete kind of way meeting with our local priests. Look what we've been able to do with trafficking, that we can do some groundwork, some help with education, and begin to really, I mean, we got the solar panel, we have a lot to begin with. How can we support possibly working through our parishes, or literally the deanery as maybe getting to the whole diocese, but to really raise the same kind of concern and the concrete actions that we've been doing in arguing with trafficking, and I'll now begin, no, we're not just beginning, but really add to that a really concentrated effort to help raise these kinds of questions.
You know, I think that's a great idea, Tierney, and what some congregations, not so much Catholic ones, but other denominations have green teams, or something equivalent to that. And they have something nationally, even programs that are certificate, and so they plot out in their parish what they're going to do. It's education, making xeriscape, so they're not using so much water, that's in our region, for their landscape, energy efficiency, evaluation, solar, and the policy advocacy as well as part of that, and to be engaged. So I would suggest trying to get a core of people, even if it's 4 in a faith community, to be saying, and we want to do this, and you don't have to do it. We will do it, and this is what we want to do, or this is our plan. And because one of the things sometimes it comes down to, if you're looking at the practical, is money, that they can be saving money in their plants as well on energy.
Interesting too, in our own Franciscan Mayo partnership, Mayo has an incredible green committee, and they are working at a macro level. I think very few people in the city know anything about that. And I mean, there could be working in that kind of context too, continuing that Franciscan Mayo partnership. I mean, I think there are things right here that we could help really raise some great consciousness awareness.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I think to do it interfaith-wise if you can, because that again says it's a whole other message of working together amidst our diversities. And if we can do that on this, maybe we can help bridge that gap in some of the violence that we're seeing rearing, and discrimination that's rearing its head as well. But yes, that would be excellent. Any other questions, comments?
Before the COP, Paris, we were talking about fossil fuel companies being involved there. How did you see them involved, or were they present?
You know, I have to say, I really did not, to speak of. I have to say, in Copenhagen, I did. I saw a lot of it in Copenhagen. But in Paris, I mean, there's certainly some, but there was, was not noticeable for me doesn't say it wasn't there, but it wasn't noticeable. More what was noticeable, which I found fascinating, I went to a press conference one day that was businesses. And these businesses were talking about how, with the mitigation part of this, that they had, I can't remember the numbers, I'm not so good with numbers, how many millions, hundreds of millions of dollars they had pledged for mitigation, which would be renewable energy before they entered COP. Well, then once they got to COP, then it was amped up, doubled or something, and then towards the end of COP, it was almost like tripled the amount of investment money that was there, and businesses were ready to go forward. Divestment was talked about, and they talked about that, divesting from the fossil fuels, investing in green energy, renewables, technologies. This was a clear message, the game is over, and they know it, and so probably one of the stronger holds are the U.S. companies and in this country, and our intervention in other countries like Africa, for instance. But the people don't have money for it, they're not going there, especially as there's more micro lending and other financial resources to jump over that in some of those developing countries and move into some things, some other technologies that are affordable and they don't have to keep paying for all the time. But the energy, once you have the system, it's basically there. So, yeah. So that's good, good news. And it doesn't, we're still, our candidates right now are heavily, heavily funded by the fossil fuel industry in this country. But that's kind of, I see it as like a sort of a death rattle almost. And the other thing most people don't know is they're doing that. They're also working on the side with new technologies and renewables because they know. And they know that they're going to have stranded assets, and they're concerned with the bottom financial dollar line. Okay, I don't know how much, I have almost a quarter till, so maybe one more question?
Sister Joan, I was surprised that you did not speak about your first picture of you up there next to the American flag. All those flags, were there 190 of those pillars with flags on?
Yes, there were.
Good. I never read anything about it or anything.
Yeah, that was as you entered the COP, it was all these pillars with everybody's flags, and yeah, that was kind of unlike me to be there with the American flag. But I had to say, this is who I am, this is where I am, even in some of my embarrassment sometimes, because we should be stronger in all these issues. The Vatican also had their flag. But I couldn't find anybody to take a picture with me by that, so there was somebody nearby in there. So yes, but all of these countries, 195 flags were there. Yes, very good eyes. Okay. Well, thank you again so much. Sign and leave them in the back and I'll take them. Okay?
And remember, the last idea that we're going to hear. Thanks, Joan.